part of our immersive learning today is the smoke that we brought from Canada. But the other part is giving you all an opportunity to get up close and personal with artillery from the Civil War. And so I invited my good friend Al Robertson. Al has known me since I'm a little kid. Al and I both shoot, as does Gary and my son, and Al's son in the North-South Skirmish Association. So we shoot live fire, Civil War period firearms. So when, like, if you're out here on a tour with me and we're talking about the accuracy of arms, I speak from experience, not from reading it. Al, in addition to shooting small arms, also shoots artillery. I'm not talking a reenactor shooting a blank, I'm talking live rounds at 200 yards. And he can hit a target that's what, 12 inches in diameter?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's good. So I'm going to turn it over to Al, who is going to give you opportunities to see and touch and experience things that many of you, aside from Gary and Colonel Cook, probably have never had and will never have again. So.
All right, thank you. What we have here is a 6-pounder field gun, model 1841, and it's limber, the ammunition wagon. This would not have been on this side of the river. 6-pounders were pretty much gone by the time of the Civil War, where the Union was moving to rifled cannon and that sort of stuff, and they had the industry or whatever that they could do that. There was a lot more foundries. I think West Point Foundry and Fort Pitt Foundry, Ames, those three, any one of them outproduced the entire Confederate output during the war. So they were basically replacing the older technology with new technology. On the other side of the river, they did have those. That's one thing that was really different on, in this battle. On this side, there were two 12-pound Napoleons, okay, with the West Virginia battery. But on the other side, there were only 2 rifled guns. They had 2 24-pounders, they had 2 rifled guns. I think they had like 6 or 8 6-pounders, and then the rest were 12-pounder cannons. So the engagement was about 1,300 yards from what I, kind of looked on the map and that sort of stuff as to where the Confederates were attacking from and where the Union batteries were positioned. There were 4 batteries on the Union side, 3 batteries on the Confederate side. The Union was firing over the heads of their troops. The Confederates, 1 battery was up in the line of battle. The other 2 were firing over top of the troops. And I mention that because when you're firing artillery over top of your own troops, certain rounds are better than others. And we'll talk about the rounds here a little bit if you want to kind of gather over around here. Every gun during the Civil War had 4 different kinds of ammunition. All right. The first, everybody kind of knows, it's solid shot. For a rifled gun, they would call that a bolt, but it's a solid shot. The purpose of this is long range, the maximum range of the gun. This gun here, the smooth bores, are typically one mile. The rifled guns are 2 miles. Now, the Whitworth at Gettysburg, that had a range of 5 miles. So they were able to shoot from Oak Hill all the way over to Little Round Top. But that was the only one that really had that kind of range. All the other guns that were being used, not seacoast or siege guns, but the field artillery was 1 mile for a smooth bore, 2 miles for a rifled gun. All right. At long range, this is used against masses of troops because what will happen is it'll hit and it's like a freight train. It don't stop. It's going to bounce all over the place. One of the times I was with this gun up at New York, and I was shooting basically half military charge. Military charge is 1.25 pounds. I was shooting about 1/2 pound. And I was shooting at there were some subscale guns, some like half-scale guns and that sort of stuff in the competition. And what happened was they were shooting at 100 yards. Well, my balls were going through the targets, hitting at about 200 yards out. The range was about 300 total to the backstop. The balls hit at about 200, 225, something like that. They skipped. They hit the backstop. They skipped up. They went up across this hill, and we tracked them because these guys came up to me and it's like, "Wow, that was really cool." We said, we saw trees falling down and that, With a half charge, it went through about 80 inches of wood, and we never found it. It went through a pine tree, like a hole right through the pine tree, like a 13 or 14-inch pine tree. We hit it square and just went straight through it. So they would use this against troops at long range because it would bounce around. Troops are moving around at shoulder to shoulder, and so you're going to wipe out a bunch whenever it starts to ricochet. I'll pass that one around. Now let me describe a little bit about pounders. I brought that term up earlier, 6 pound, 12 pound, 24 pound, or whatever. Basically what it is a ball, the diameter of that bore weighs that weight. So this is 3.67 inches, and that's an iron ball of that weight, of that diameter, will weigh 6 pounds. A 12 pounder is 4.62 inches. And a ball of that diameter will weigh 12 pounds. It gets a little fuzzy whenever you get into rifle guns, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But so that's passing around here. That's a 12 or a 6 pound, round shot or solid shot. The next kind of ammunition was also fairly long range, but maybe not quite as long as that. That would be used at 1,700 yards, a mile, or closer, against troops, mass troops, or the other thing would be fortifications. You're going to batter the fortification, trying to make it, weaken it, particularly like masonry fortifications. The next kind of ammunition, and I'll pass this around, this is a common shell. Now basically what it is just a hollow sphere full of gunpowder. And that's one of the reasons why the Federals got rid of the 6 pounders, and started to switch to the 12 pound or to the more modern technology of the rifling, is this would hold maybe about 3/4 pound of gunpowder, where a 12 pounder will hold like 1.25 pounds. So it has a lot more explosive force. Also on top, you will notice this ring. All right, that's a Borman fuse. There were a number of different fuses, and we won't get into, there's hundreds of different types of fuses. We'll talk about a couple of them. Borman fuse was really pretty much used by almost all of the Federal guns that are still shooting, round balls. And basically what it is, it's a lead disc about this thick. Here's one, I'll pass that around. Here's one that has been exploded and it's split out. But what it is a lead disc, and it threads into the ball, and there's a powder train inside of it that burns at a very specific rate. And if you look at it whenever you pass this around, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4. This one was punched somewhere about 3, I think, if I read that right. But what it does is, as the powder goes off behind the shell, that fire and that explosion, okay, is progressing along the barrel with the gun, or with the ball. At the moment it exits the ball, or exits the barrel, the flame wraps around it, and that would ignite the fuse. Then it would burn around that train, and then go down into it, and then explode. These would have been used out to maybe about 1600 yards, and as close as maybe about 800 yards. You would be using this. This was, you know, basically if you battered a fortification with the solid shot, now you got holes in those bricks and stuff like that, and you start launching these into them, they get down into those holes and they explode, they break down the wall even faster. Yeah, here, we put that. Or if you've got masses of troops and they're in woods, one of the most effective ways of dealing with that would be these. You aim up in the trees and you let it explode inside the trees. Now you've got shrapnel raining down, but you also have tree branches and stuff like that. It's a demoralizing effect, you know, as the troops are sitting there waiting to attack. The other thing would be like Early, when he went to Chambersburg, he used these to set the town on fire. You know, he was using, common shell, was it to, ignite the buildings or whatever. So that's the second kind of ammo. We'll pass that around.
How is it punched? Is it punched at manufacture, or do the artillerymen do it?
No, the artillerymen do it based on what range they're going to shoot at. And if you notice up here, in the upper left corner of that Reichert case, that's a Borman fuse punch on the right. That. All it is just like kind of like a knife, and they would take that and they'd say, okay, the gunner would tell them what kind of ammunition, what range, and then if you look up on here, there's a table of fire. And the people that are operating the limber, what they would do then is they read off of that, and they would go and say, okay, he wants 1,000 yards. Okay, they look on that, a common shell. He pulls out a common shell, reads the table, takes that punch, and if it's like 3 seconds or whatever, a flight time, he hits that, punches a hole in it. All right. The other kind of shell, or the other kind of fuse, while we're on it, is in the smaller Reichert case there in the front. Okay, those are just regular time fuses. And basically what it is, it's a firecracker wrapped, very tightly, and it has a slight taper to it. And the length of it is what predicts how long it's going to burn. And they had a device inside here. If I see this. This is a reproduction or whatever, but what they would do, it has graduations on it, and what they would do is they'd lay that fuse in there. If they have only 4-second fuses and they want 3, they would lay that in there, close it up, and then they saw it off. And then there was the fuse on the shell was like just a lead, a lead holder that screwed into the shell, and then they would slide that in there, and it did the same thing. Whenever the flame enveloped the shell at the muzzle, it would ignite it and time down. So that's the 2 basic kind of fuses that they used. Confederate used a lot of those because they were using more round shot rather than rifles and that sort of stuff. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The other kind of ammunition, the third type of ammunition, is the spherical case, or as we would call it, shrapnel. It was invented by Sir Shrapnel, and he was the one that came up with the idea. But basically, it's the same as a common shell. You can't tell the difference unless you weigh them. One weighs more than the other. The spherical case weighs more than the other because it is full of lead balls. with a small bursting charge, in the in the center. And the idea of this is not to, like our modern shrapnel rounds, they come down in and they scatter in all directions. The idea of this with the small bursting charge was it would crack the case, and from that point those balls and the shrapnel from the case would start to go into an ever-increasing cone. So what they did, if they're using this, and this would be more like from about 600 yards out to maybe 1,000 yards, you would be using this. And what they would do is they would aim and set the fuses to explode about 25 yards in front of the enemy troops advancing. Purpose of that is that if it gets up here right next to somebody, and then starts to go into a cone, I'm only going to take out so many. But if I do it 25 yards in front of me, I'm going to take a whole swath out of their line, because the men are marching forward at shoulder to shoulder. So I'll pass that around. Please don't touch the interior here. That's sulfur. The molten sulfur that once they had the balls inside there, they packed it in there so they didn't rattle around, and that until the shell exploded. The last kind of ammunition, which probably was not used here, is canister. And this is a recreated canister. It was found, and then somebody found all the parts to it where it exploded and landed, and they put it all back together. But it's for a 6-pounder gun, and it has a 1/4-inch plate on the bottom. It has an 1/8-inch thick plate on the top, and it has 27 iron balls in it. These are 1 1/4 inches for a 6-pounder. When you get up into the bigger guns, they got bigger. I think a 12-pounder was like an 1 1/4 inches, if I remember correctly. You can get up to a 32-pounder and they're 2 inches, but all had 27 balls to it. This was used from basically point-blank range out to 600 yards. Beyond 600 yards, the pattern dispersed too much and it wouldn't be effective. So they also did what they called double shotting of this, where they, up through 12 pounders, they had fixed ammunition. The powder bag was fixed to the round with a wooden sabot. It was just, tied to that wooden sabot. And I'll show you one here in a little bit. But what they would do is they would take the first one, they would load the powder and the shot into it, and then the next one they knock the powder bag off, throw that away, and load this in on top of it. So now you have, instead of 27, you've got 54 iron balls flying. And what it does is it just turns that cannon into a huge shotgun. Wow. And that's where smooth bores really shone, because the rifle guns they had canister rounds, but they tended to kind of spin it, and that kind of concentrated it, didn't allow it to spread out as much as a smooth bore did. So, but this wouldn't have been used here because of the extreme ranges and firing over the heads of their own troops. But to make these more effective, just like with the spherical case, what they did is they would also aim the gun about 25 yards in front of the advancing troops. And what that does, all the balls, if I'm level and you're about 200 yards away from me, that pattern, half of it's going to go over their heads, the other half will hit. So what they did is they aimed about 25 yards in front of the troops advancing, so all of the balls ricocheted into the ground and ricocheted up into the troops. So that was one of the nasty little tactics that they did. I'll pass that around here too. To give you a different size, we passed around the common shell and the solid shot, the 6-pounder. This is a 12-pounder. So you can see it's a lot bigger and contains a lot more powder. This is a common shell, so pass that around also. All right, let's get into some of the ones that pretty much takes care of most of the other side of the river. That's the kind of ammunition that they were using. As I said, they only had 2 3-inch rifles over there. On this side, they would have been using one of these 3 types of rounds. And I'll pass this around. This is for a parrot. It's a 3-inch parrot, or what they would call a 10-pounder. You know, it weighs about 10 pounds. This is also, when you start getting into rifling, you can have concussion fuse or percussion fuses. And basically all this is, it's a piece of lead that's threaded. They thread that in there, and inside there's a percussion cone, just like on a musket or on a cap, or on a pistol, cap and ball pistol. And what they would do, there was a little threaded top made of lead with a steel or metal base to it, and it capped over it with thread over it. And what they would do is at the limber, they would undo it, put the cap on it, tighten it back down, deliver it to the gun. So when it hit, it would set the cap off and explode the shell. That was the basic, simple, percussion fuse type on rifled guns. On a round ball, you can't do that. You don't know which side is going to hit first. There is one round for a round ball, it's called a Tice fuse, that had mercury, like fulminated mercury and iron, or metal balls inside of it, and it was glass. And basically when the ball hit, it would break the glass, the balls would fly around inside that container and ignite the fulminate and set the shell off. That is one round that if you ever find it, you do not touch it, because you have no idea what the state of that round is. They're very, very rare, and probably that's one of the reasons, because if people do find them, they're, they call the bomb squad. Basically you blow it up in place. Because these things, you'll notice there's holes in these. This one, I rode home and I checked it. I saw holes in it and I checked it and said, okay, it's got a hole, so it's unloaded. They drilled through into the powder chamber and they flushed it out and that sort of stuff. Well, I bought it down at one of the chutes at one of our nationals, and when I got it home, I put a probe down in it. I never got into the powder chamber. They drilled it and they never hit the powder chamber. So, and this thing's rolling around in the back of my van, and I'm like, okay. So I took it back to one of the guys down there. He de-armed it for me or whatever. But they will blow up. The powder's still viable in many of these.
2000, Chesterfield County.
Yeah.
Did they,
Last
the
Petersburg
rifling
Cavalry.
inside the barrel,
You can see
spun
on
it
that.
from the back, right?
Yeah, you can see on that one there. You can see the 3 grooves.
Yeah.
On what they called the sabot.
Yeah.
On that round. Rifled guns didn't use fixed ammunition. They loaded the powder, then they loaded the shell, because they were too long. And I'll show you one of those fixed rounds or whatever. But that one drives from the back.
Right.
This one is a Hotchkiss round. They're very common. All right, and what this is, and here's where it comes into play about firing over your troops. This part here is the shell. And it has like an incline plane comes down here, and then there's a post that sticks out the back. This part here is the cap or whatever. That fits over top of that post, and there's a little bit of space to it from the bottom of the post to the inside of this cap. And then this drive band is then poured out of lead. The idea behind it is that when the gun goes off, this, the pressure smacks the back pushes this forward, expands the drive band into the rifling, and it spins it and it goes down the range. These are not good to shoot over your troops because a lot of times the cap would separate and land in your troops. So they didn't like these whenever they had to fire over troops or whatever. This one was a drop. It's not been fired, but it is better ballistically because you're driving it in the middle of the shell. Whereas the other one, the Parrot, you're driving it back here and it has a tendency to wobble or tip. But you don't want to use it over your own troops. The kind that you would like to use over your own troops is a Schenkel. These are all 3-inch guns, which the Federals would have been using here, other than the two 12-pound Napoleons that they had. They would have been using these kinds of rounds. The Schenkel kind of has sort of a tail here, but it had a paper mache tube, like basically, that was molded onto these ribs to hold it into place. So if you're going to fire over your own troops, paper mache will give somebody a headache, but it's not going to kill them. So these would be preferred round to be using over top of your troops. Schenkel fuses can get to be complicated. You'll see here there's a bunch of little holes here on the top, and if you looked at it, those holes, what they did is they would come in from the top and then they curled around the fuse. So by turning the top of the fuse, it would be like a time and a percussion fuse. So by turning it to a certain, and it was graduated, you would set how long it would burn, because the holes inside the piece that turned and the holes on the outside of the fuse would match up at a certain point, so that you would get, from that point on, it would time and burn down. The other thing was, it also was a percussion fuse, so that if it didn't time out and it hit something, it would set off, some powder in there, and that would follow those channels and then get into the main charge or whatever. That's probably the most complicated one we're going to talk about today. There's all kinds of other ones, water cap fuses that Navy used and that sort of stuff like that. So, but anyhow, those would be pretty common for what the troops would have been using here. There's also some other artifacts you can look at. There's some pictures of some artillery batteries. You can see this one here is unknown, but they have 12-pound Napoleons is what they're using. You can pass those around. This one we think is Knapp's battery at Antietam, and they have looks to be Parrot rifles. Okay, you pass those. And then this one here gives you an idea of what a battery would look like on the march. You can see the 6 guns, and you can see the battery wagon, the traveling forge, and everything like that. A battery was a major organization. So you pass that around too. The other thing you'll notice is you don't see, they were issued sabers and pistols. And we have here the 3 different kinds of sabers they might have been issued. A artillery saber, an 1860 and an 1840 saber. Cavalry got the 1840 and the 1860, but the artillery also, I have a photograph at home of a artillerist from Maine, and he's standing there with an 1860 cavalry saber. But they had pistols, but when they manned the guns, they didn't really They really didn't have them. I mean, and you look at that one photograph of the battery in motion, they're not armed. You know, they don't have their sabers on and all that sort of stuff, whether they were in the battery wagons or whatever. They were issued them, but when it comes down to operating cannons, was that you don't want something that's going to trip you or anything like that. You want to get from, you know, up.
That's what the infantry's for.
Yeah.
Protecting.
Yeah. Now a battery of 6 guns can really defend its front. And they start shooting canister out of 6 guns, and I've seen canister shooting. There's nothing that's going to live in front of that when they start double shotting and things like that. I mean, it's just going to wipe out a swath in front of them. But from the flanks, they're very vulnerable, and that's one of the reasons why they always wanted to have infantry on the flanks of a battery to protect the guns, you know. And sometimes infantry guys, you know, whenever they started losing enough artillerists, they grabbed a few guys from the infantry and said, "Here, come here. That guy back there is going to hand you a shell. Bring it up here to the front." You know, start doing that, you know. So, any questions at this point before we move on to the next part?
I believe at Gettysburg, the Union chained a couple of their balls together and fired them simultaneously.
I'm not aware of that. Now, Navy
would do that.
Navy did that. Navy had bar shot, they had chain shot. The purpose of that was to tear the rigging.
Yeah.
You know, tear the sails, tear the rigging, or like, you know, if you hit the mast, you know, it could, you know, do significant damage and weaken the mast or whatever. But I'm not aware
How in
of.
the world would you get it simultaneous?
What's that?
Well, black powder in a cannon. How in the world could you get those?
It's pretty. I mean, the chain would be kind of, you know,
Bunched
bunched up into it, you know, and most of those were going to be on bigger guns, 32 pounders, you know, 24 pounders, and that sort of stuff like that.
Very short range.
Yeah, at very short range, yeah. And a lot of the guns, like carronades, you know, carronade's only maybe about this long, something like that. A 24-pound carronade or 32-pounder, you know, like would be on the Constitution or something. They're not very long, so it's not going to take a lot of time, was it, to, you know, give that time to separate. Plus, you know, if you load the front half, you know, or the back half and the front half like this and slide it down the bore, you know, it's going to push the whole mass out, you know. But once it gets out there, it's just going to sit there and do this, you know, spin. So
I know there were some instances during the heat of battle where they loaded double canister and they forgot to knock off the second powder charge, and sometimes it would like damage the cannon.
Yeah, that would not be good. Right. That would not be good, particularly in a Parrott rifle. Parrott rifles, you know, this one, you know, this is a reproduction, and it's made out of, it has a 1/2-inch thick, drawn over mandrel, modern steel tube, you know, and the base is threaded in and welded in and that sort of stuff. And then the barrel was cast solid and then drilled out, and that tube was inserted and it's pinned in there and everything like that. But it would have been made out of naval bronze, they called it. But Parrott rifles were cast iron, and that big thick band that's on the back of them, that was wrought iron. Wrought iron, you know, basically is kind of trying to duplicate steel, which has, you know, is not as brittle. You know, and can expand a little bit. So by putting that wrought iron band around it, that helps to preserve the barrel, because back there at the breech is where you're going to have the highest pressures develop, you know, and then it'll go on. But Parrott rifles had a bad habit of about halfway down the barrel, you know, or towards the muzzle end, they would break, they'd crack. There were a number of instances there. What was the one picture I've seen in a book or whatever? It was a swamp angel they were using to shell Fort Sumter and Charleston and that sort of stuff. Front end of the gun's gone, you know, but they're still shooting it. You know. Yeah.
When you just said that the barrel would dismember.
Blow up, yeah.
Did they ever use like a coating? Did they ever put something into the barrel to coat it to prevent any?
No.
So that wouldn't have been a thought?
Yeah, no, that wasn't what they did. Now, what they did, technology and metallurgy started to get advanced around that point in time, and there was what they called the Griffith gun, which eventually turned into the 3-inch ordnance rifle. And what they did with that is they took cast iron, or they took bands of cast iron and they forged them. And what they did was they turned it into wrought iron, because basically why cast iron is so brittle is it has so high a carbon content. Steel was typically maybe around, mild steel was anywhere from 0.06 percent carbon up to 0.95% carbon, and the more carbon you put in it, the more brittle it becomes. But cast iron is more like 45%, 35% iron, something like that. I'm a metallurgist anyhow, so. But what they did by forging under heat, they would drive some of that carbon out and make it more malleable. Now, what the Griffith gun did, and this was done at the the Phoenix Iron Works, which turned into, it's in Conshohocken, PA, so that turned into Lukens, and I worked with Lukens for a while. Basically what they did was they took those wrought iron bands and they wrapped them around on a lathe over a core. They wrapped them around. They took, I think, 5 of them, and they just braided them. Then what they did is they took that into a furnace, heated the whole mass up, and then they forged that whole mass into one solid chunk of metal. And then they also designed it so that it was smooth. They didn't have, if you notice on here, there's like steps in the barrel. There's the breech reinforced, the first reinforced, the muzzle ring, and that sort of stuff to improve the the reliability of the gun. And what they did by making it all smooth is there's no stress risers. So whenever it would expand with the shot, it didn't have a sharp corner, whatever, that the forces could go in and cause a break. Now they did do some other things. Technology came along where they cooled the inside of the barrel rather than just let it cool from the outside. The Rodman guns done at Fort Pitt Foundry, that's how they did those, so that it was a more even cooling. And even though the Rodman guns were a cast iron, because of how they cooled that, it was a lot stronger. So, there was a lot of technology going on at that time, a lot of invention. War, necessity is the mother of invention, and war oftentimes, makes that go forward. So,
Unrelated question to all that discussion.
okay.
In that ammo case, it's a 6-pound ammo case, right?
Yes.
What a routine basic load would be? How many rounds and what type?
Yeah, they would be, and they're different for each pounder gun.
Okay.
Okay.
That's why I asked about that
Yeah.
particular one.
This carries 50 rounds. All right. And so in a battery, you've got the cannon and a limber, and you need the limber to get the cannon off of the field, so that it forms an articulating cart, basically, that can go over rough ground. But there would also be for each gun a caisson and another limber. In case this one got blown up or damaged or something, you still had a limber that you could come back and get the gun
So
and
that
move
would be
it.
half the basic load
Yeah.
of that gun.
Well, what you had, each chest carried 50 rounds for a 6-pounder. So when you went into action, you had available to you 200 rounds of ammunition.
200, okay.
Now, a 12-pounder I think, and I'm going from memory here, I think it only had something like 32 or 38, something like that. The limbers, the ammunition chests, were all the same. It was just the number of rounds that you could carry. The bigger the gun, the fewer rounds you would carry.
What would be a routine mixture?
Routine mixture would be typically about 25 rounds of solid shot, 10 rounds of spherical case, 10 rounds of common shell, and 5 rounds of canister. And if you look inside there, you can see the dividers. You know, that's what the dividers would look like. Now, you know, like for a 12-pounder, they would be a little further apart, you know, and fewer dividers. But
Why don't you bring people over to see inside here?
Sure.
yeah, yeah, take a look there as we go. But they could pick whatever they wanted. You know, whenever the battery commander could go and he could pick whatever he wanted.
So,
Like if he-
so different, they'd have different distribution.
Yeah, that's according to the manuals, what was loaded in there.
I'm sure it
But-
also might be.
But if
what's
the guy
available.
says, I'm going in against troops,
Or,
I'm going to take maybe 15 rounds of canister, you know.
or if they're short of something,
Yeah.
then of course you can't control
Yeah,
that.
and what they would do is like in battle, you see the pins there in the front of the chest. Those come up, and there's like little dogs that hold it into the thing. What they would do is they would take the limber back to the caisson, back it up against the caisson. 2 men would pick up the empty ammunition chest, set it on the ground, then they would slide the other ammunition chest onto the limber, put the pins back in it, send it up to the front. And they could take, you know, if all 4 of those chests had 5 rounds of canister and I want more canister, they could start scavenging from there and start putting it into, you know, into action or whatever. So anyhow,
You're talking. I'm gonna order. You're really
yeah.
turning me
Let's, I need 5 volunteers is what I need. There you go. There's 1, there's 2, you can be 3. Let's get 2 more from over here. 4. Yeah. Come on, I need 1 more volunteer. Need 1 more volunteer.
He's gonna do it.
Okay, 5. All right, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you what the positions were. Now, a typical battery of light artillery has got 93, 94 horses and about 80 some men, you know, with all the wagons, the drivers and everything like that or whatever. And that, according to the manuals, was, okay, 8 men to operate each gun. And then, you know, a couple more was it in the, you know, driving the caisson, and a couple more at the the battery wagon and that sort of stuff like that. But due to illness, battle wounds, that kind of thing like that, it was probably pretty more typical that they had about 5 men actually operating the guns, you know, as the batteries would shrink, you know, during the war. It was kind of like the infantry, you know. Yeah, a regiment started off at 1,000 men, but by the time you get to Gettysburg, most of those regiments are only 380 men, something like that, you know. They're, you know, depleted quite a bit, you know. So I'm going to show you the routine of, you know, the various positions and how it would have been operated with five men. Now, you're a big, strong guy, you know, come on over here, those 5 guys.